Digital marketing is one of the fastest evolving fields in tech, so you can't afford not to keep up. In this video, we're going to cut through the noise and we're going to look at 6 digital marketing trends that are actually going to happen in 2023. At the end of this video, you'll have an excellent idea of where digital marketing is going next year, and you'll have some great ideas for new projects for you and your team. Hey, my name's Ed, Chief Marketing Officer here at Career Foundry, and we've compiled a list of digital marketing trends to help you keep up with this fast-changing industry in 2023. Focusing on the bigger picture is important when you're analyzing any kind of trend. So these trends will be useful regardless of the industry that you're in. So before we dive into the specific digital marketing trends for 2023, let's talk a little bit about the wider context in which these trends will develop, because you have to understand that context to understand why these trends are going to take place. So the first mega trend or macro trend that we're going to talk about is the state of economies around the world. As you'll all be aware, there are lots of economies that are descending into recession or are already in a recession, and that obviously puts a lot of pressure on both investors and marketing leaders to manage budgets as efficiently and as effectively as possible. And that obviously facilitates the development of a lot of different trends. For example, companies might start focusing more and more on organic channels rather than paid channels in this quest for greater efficiency. Secondly, off the back of the pandemic and these tectonic shifts in the way that we worked, moving much more to remote work, for example, using digital tools much more obsessively during the day, we're going to see a continued development of how people interact with the digital world and the kind of tools that they use and the kind of tools that they're used to using on a daily basis. So let's take an example. Obviously, at the beginning of the pandemic, everyone moved their meetings into Zoom rooms. And Zoom rooms, understandably, people are perhaps a little bit fed up with now. But we've also introduced or seen the introduction of lots of different tools like Miro and Butter, which provide these much more engaging and collaborative experiences. And the question might be, how do you transfer these collaborative experiences to the marketing world? So another mega trend that dates back to before the pandemic is the way that we manage data within companies and questions of privacy. So we've seen regulations being introduced across the world, such as GDPR in Europe, which really impacts the way that we deal with data. You haven't only seen governmental bodies introduce this kind of regulation, you've also seen companies like Apple introduce new ways of working or new ways of monitoring and managing data on their devices, which has really changed the way that marketers work, because it means that less data is available to them. So this also impacts the way that marketers can market. So those are 3 of the big changes that we're seeing within society in this broader context. You have, on the one hand, you have the state of the economy. On the other hand, you have data management processes. On the other hand, you have these big shifts in the way that we work that are all going to affect the way that we market. Let's look a little bit more at the kind of platforms that are being used and the changes that we're seeing there, which obviously also impacts the way that we market. First of all, we see this massive shift towards video-first marketing. When you look at platforms like TikTok and the platforms that have kind of copied TikTok, like Instagram and YouTube with YouTube Shorts, you see this massive move from a lot of image and text-based posting to video-first posting. And that's something that's only going to develop more and more in the future, and we're going to see more and more vertical video across all these different platforms. So what do I mean when I say platforms? Well, let's take the example of TikTok. Obviously, TikTok is a video-first platform, a video-first social media, and we've seen how incredibly successful it is. So literally people spend hours per day on these platforms, and that's something that Instagram or even YouTube would dream of. And so you see them copying the tactics of TikTok are moving towards this video first and vertical video first platform. And that means we're seeing less and less text-based and image-based social media and more video-based social media, because it leads to much more engagement, which means much more attention, which means ultimately probably more ad revenue for those platforms. Another big shift that I think we're experiencing is the intermingling of the personal brand and the company brand. So you even have some examples of companies that are really about personal brand first and then building a company off the back of this personal brand. And ultimately what people are looking for, I think, is a more human connection with the brand that they're connecting with or that they're interacting with. And finally, the last trend I'd like to talk about is the distinction between demand generation and demand capture. This is something that Chris Walker, the CEO of Refine Labs, talks a lot about, where demand capture is all about bringing in new customers that are already interested in your product or your solution or your service. And demand generation is all about informing, educating, and inspiring potential new customers about the product to increase the amount of awareness and base of potential customers. And with demand likely dwindling because of recessions in various different economies, it's going to be increasingly important to build brand and to generate demand rather than just capture it. So how do these mega trends or these big trends play out into actual marketing actions in 2023? What are we going to see in 2023 as a result of these changes? Let's start by looking at digital marketing trend number 1, which is the TikTokification of everything. So as I mentioned in the introduction, TikTok has become overwhelmingly successful in terms of the growth of users, but also, and very importantly, the amount of time that these users will spend on the platform. With users spending 2 or 3 hours a day on the platform, this means that the platform has very strong retention and really has tons of opportunities to advertise to these users. And these are obviously opportunities that advertisers and marketers are willing to pay for. So the question is, why is TikTok so powerful? Why is it so successful? And what's it doing differently to some of the other social media like Instagram and YouTube before they started copying TikTok? Well, one of the major things is that the content is recommended via algorithms. So rather than the content being user-based, where you follow a user and then you see the content from that user, there's an algorithm behind the content recommendation engine that's deciding based upon your behavior what you will like. And that algorithm is extremely successful in determining what we'd be interested in, and essentially means that people are spending a lot of time on the platform. And what we've seen with the other social media platforms, Instagram and YouTube are the obvious examples, is a similar shift to this algorithmic suggestions of video content, short form video content. And that basically means for us marketers, we have to be experts in short form video generation. And at the moment, there simply aren't that many experts outside the creator sphere and in the marketing sphere for that short form video generation. So we'll see the development of more roles for short form video creators, and we'll also see the development of marketers who cleverly distribute this short form video content as well. In fact, I think you'll see the same kind of distribution of video creators as you'll see currently in design or copy. So if you look at a marketing team, you might have copywriters that are specialized in long form copy, like blog writers. In short form, copywriters for ads, for example. In design, you might see social media designers, you might see product designers, you might see print designers, and basically you'll see the same variety of different roles under the umbrella of video, where you'll really have videographers, as I said, specialized in short form video. You'll have others specialized in long form, documentary, etc. And you might actually have these roles either within one team in a company or distributed across different teams within a company as well. So which companies are doing this well already? To be honest, there aren't that many, but one that really pops up in the press quite a lot and deservedly gets a lot of recognition is Duolingo's TikTok channel, where they have a big fluffy green owl that goes around the office and wreaks havoc within the office and is generally quite risque. And that's definitely a channel worth checking out because that's an example of a company that's done it extremely successfully. But otherwise, I still notice companies really struggling with TikTok and really struggling to strike the right tone between something that's entertaining and funny and something that's perhaps educational and inspirational and a bit more credible. So the second major digital marketing trend for 2023 is the proliferation of online events and live experiences online. There are two things to consider here. Firstly, is how live experiences and live events are prioritized across social media. So for example, when you see someone go live on Instagram and it'll appear right at the top of your feed. Similarly on LinkedIn, it will be prioritized as content. So this is almost a surefire way to get in front of your audience for a period of time. That's one thing to think about. The second thing to think about is how these experiences will develop next year. And I think this is probably the biggest change. With the pandemic, we obviously saw this shift from offline events, from conferences and things like that, to online events. And often what people did was they tried to replicate the offline experience online. And now what we're seeing is with the development of all sorts of interesting and mass collaborative tools like FigJam, like Miro, like Butter, we're seeing experiences that actually are as good as or potentially even surpass the experience that you have offline. And not only that, you get the added advantage of a digital footprint. So you have everything saved that you've done in the event that you can transfer to any other environment and use it there too. So you actually have these online experiences that are potentially way better than the offline experiences. And we might even crack other conundrums like how to introduce networking and more natural networking into these environments too. So what are we going to see as marketers? Well, hopefully we'll see fewer and fewer Zoom rooms and simple lectures, and we'll see more environments where you have 100, 1,000, 2,000, 10,000 people collaboratively working on something and exchanging information. So if you're not sure what I'm talking about, you can check out the Career Foundry events, where we also do live interactive online events where you could do your first data analysis, or you could design your first app screen with some of our expert mentors. If you want to check some of those out, just click the link in the description. Digital marketing trend number 3 for 2023 is the continued growth and evolution of influencer marketing. Now, obviously, influencer marketing has been around as a term for some time. I think as a respectable role within a marketing team, it's really earned its place. And I think in 2023, we're going to see the continued professionalization. Why? Because it's typically a very efficient channel. So again, with economies in recession, companies potentially struggling a bit more for cash and for marketing budgets, they're going to be looking at ways of investing in campaigns that are efficient and also have a long-term effect. And typically influencer marketing produces good short-term results, purchases, enrollments, whatever it might be, but also a longer-term effect in terms of brand uplift and brand awareness. So what's going to happen in the influencer marketing sphere? Well, first of all, we'll see more agencies popping up, and we'll see more software that connects influencers with companies. And we'll also see the evolution of the way that influencers work. So you'll see much more professional influencers, you'll see micro influencers, so those with smaller followings who are working with companies on very specific niches. And you'll also see much more long-term partnerships between companies and influencers, much more in the mold of how celebrities would work with companies over long periods of time to do TV advertising, for example. So why is that going to happen? Because influencers are master audience builders. So you might work with an influencer when they have 100,000 fans, and 6 months later you might work with them again, and suddenly they've got 500,000 fans or followers or whatever it might be. So even though you're working with the same person, you're addressing quite a new and different audience. And so you'll see these repeat collaborations more and more. You'll see the growth of agencies, the growth of software around this, and the overall professionalization of the industry as a whole. Now moving on to digital marketing trend number 4 for 2023, and not such a shift away from influencer marketing. Obviously, influencer marketing is all about building your personal brand. So what happens when you've built your personal brand? You want to capitalize on it, you want to make money out of it. And how do you do that? Well, maybe you start a company. Maybe you start a company in the niche where you have that following as an influencer or as a personal brand. And that's what we see a lot of people doing. So if we take a few examples like Grace Beverly and Tala, if you look at Grace Beverly's following, then she has 1 million followers on Instagram and her company has about 300,000. And generally the reach you get as an individual is much greater than the reach you get as a company. Why? Because people are interested in human beings, not so much in the company. So what does this mean for 2023? Well, you'll see more companies evolving from personal brands, but you also see it really moving in the other direction. So you'll see companies that are really focused on developing the personal brands of their founders, of their C-level, but also of people within the company that are willing and able to build their personal brands across social media as well. So let's talk about a couple of companies that have done this well and innovatively. I referred to Chris Walker in the introduction, comparing demand generation and demand capture. And Chris Walker is the CEO of Refine Labs. And Refine Labs have built a lot of their company on LinkedIn. And they've done this extremely cleverly. First of all, by building the personal brand of Chris Walker, of the CEO, through opinion pieces on how a B2B company should do marketing and sales. And then they've developed a playbook. And when someone joins the company for the first month, everyone has to read this playbook and start practicing this playbook on LinkedIn. And if you look at it in detail as a case study, it's super interesting. You see how the different employees within the company will interact with one another's posts to give them more and more reach and more credibility. And through this playbook, Chris Walker and Refine Labs have really managed to position themselves as experts in the industry for B2B marketing and sales, and have really grown rapidly as a company and managed to bring on fantastic talent to the company as well. So we talked about Chris Walker and Refine Labs. Let's take a couple of examples from Career Foundry Sphere from EdTech. You could take the 2 examples of Scott Galloway and Section 4. So Scott Galloway built a big reputation as a presenter and as an expert in marketing, and then launched Section 4, which is his school for marketing courses. Or we could also take Mark Ritson, who developed the Mini MBA, which has also become very popular, but really off the back of his personal brand and his authority within the field of marketing. And one more thing to mention about company and personal brands. So it can be a really sustainable and effective way of growing a business, because as a personal brand, you already have an audience that's ready and willing for the service or product that you're going to offer. But it also can cause problems a little bit further down the line when that person with the personal brand, so the founder of the company, potentially wants to step away from the business because they're so necessary to its continued growth. And so in 2023, we might see more best practices about how to transfer from this personal brand to this sustainable company brand. Digital marketing trend number 5 for 2023. We've already talked about the different kinds of tools that we work with on a daily basis, like Zoom, and more recently, collaborative tools like Miro and Butter and FigJam. So here's a question for you. Which other tools do you use during the working day? If you have a quick think about it, you probably come up with some kind of instant messaging tool or communication tool like Slack, or potentially something like Discord. And these are obviously tools that are really built for efficient communication with one another, but we don't see them used much to communicate outside of companies. At the moment, we still use things like CRMs, so email marketing, and also things like chatbots, which are a slightly more recent introduction. But still, the communication, particularly with email, can feel quite clunky and also obviously very asynchronous. You'll probably remember Slack's original tagline, how they positioned themselves. They said that they were going to replace email. And to some extent, they've replaced email within companies. But what about between companies and prospects? And so in 2023, I think we'll see these kinds of tools like Slack and Discord being used much, much more between companies and prospects, or companies and clients, in order to communicate in a much more natural and synchronous and immediate way. And as always, these are kind of ideas that are taken from the creator community. We could be talking about content producers, we could be talking about gamers, for example, and they often have a Discord community where they can share thoughts, ideas, content with their audience. And we'll see companies basically following suit and using platforms like this, like Slack and Discord, to seed new content and basically to nurture prospects from the point of first contact, from the point of awareness, all the way through to that purchase moment. And in some ways, it might even replace CRMs as the main way of doing that. So let's move on to number 6, trend number 6, the final trend for today. And the trend is marketing automation. So in the past couple of years, we've seen the growth of different tools like Zapier and Make. And what they do is basically allow different tools to communicate with one another. So you might have a tool like HubSpot, a CRM, and a tool like Slack for communication that exist quite separately, but there are ways of integrating them with tools like Make and Zapier. So how might that look? Now, if you're a marketer, you'll probably spend quite a lot of time in reports. So you might come into work or be at home working, and the first thing you do is open your marketing report. And you might refresh it and you look at the numbers that were achieved the day before and decide whether everything's going well, everything's not going so well, and what you might need to do over the coming days or weeks or months. Now, experts in marketing automation would probably say that's a bit of a waste of time. Why are you doing that when you could simply come to work, you open up your Slack, and just like your colleagues are communicating with you, you could also have your reports communicating directly with you. So what Make and Zapier would allow you to do is to go into their platform, connect the two tools, build some simple steps of logic for which you don't need to know any coding, and you can transfer the main data points in any context you want to another tool. So you can have a nice Slack message at the same time, automated every morning, telling you how many leads you've made, how many enrollments you've made, whether this is higher or lower than normal, whether any action points are necessary. And you can even share that message or automate that message to anyone within your company, whether that's your manager, whether that's the C-level, or whether that's investors. And this obviously makes your work massively more efficient. And that's just one example of how it could work. So that's just about it. Those are the top 6 digital marketing trends for 2023. I hope that prepares you well for the year and maybe even gives you an idea of things to implement. But we'd love to know your thoughts too. Do you agree? Do you disagree? Let's start a discussion in the comments below, and I'll be checking in to hear all your good ideas. And if you're new to the field of digital marketing and this has spiked your interest, you can check out our free digital marketing course, the link's in the description, where you'll get a complete introduction to the world of digital marketing, understanding what the field is, what the different roles are, what the kind of metrics that you'll be working with are, and how to excel in the field and build a career. If you want to stay ahead of the game in digital marketing, be sure to subscribe. We've got a ton more digital marketing content on the way. I'll see you next time. Thanks for watching.